How are you?
I'm doing well, though I think the bigger question is, how are you, sir?
I'm wonderful.
Wow,
I don't care what anybody says.
So you are like laughing and insisting you're wonderful as they drag you away in a straitjacket kind of a thing?
That's right. That's right. They're coming to take me away.
Did you know on the back of the single vinyl record back in the day that the song was played backwards for I'm Coming to Take Me Away?
I think I knew that some time ago. I knew that, but it's not one of those things that got stored in long-term memory.
Yeah. And you know how like everything sounds creepy when you listen to it played backwards, right? Mm-hmm. This takes that creepy to a whole new level.
Does it?
Yeah, when you listen to that one backwards, and it's out there, you can find it on the internet. If you listen to They're Coming to Take Me Away by Napoleon the Fourth?
Something like that, yeah.
Well, now you're going to have to find a link to all this.
See, my mom had a bunch of old radio station 45s. Mm-hmm. You know, because there was a transition point there somewhere when she was a young lady that the stations were switching away from 45s to some other means or whatever. So every so often, a radio station would sell off their collection of 45s for a donation or something, you know, to charity or whatever. She ended up with a collection of about 80 or so 45s, and amongst them were such classics as "Where Was Noah When the Lights Went Out?"
Oh, okay.
A Charlie Brown song, you know, and They're Coming to Take Me Away. And I think that's probably where I knew of the reverse side.
We had obviously my family had a big collection of vinyl records of various sizes. And among them were also those gems. And did you ever hear the Little Nash Rambler?
Mm-hmm.
I love that song.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Those are the classic music that has a punchline at the end era of music.
Right.
That and a really creepy song called The Little Blue Man.
Oh, yeah? That one's new.
Yeah, it's, it was done by, who is it? Betty Johnson. I had to look it up. But it's a song about she's being stalked by this little blue figure who just shows up wherever she is and insists that he loves her. And then the song ends with her unable to take it anymore. She pushes him out a window of her apartment building. And then when she finally thinks she's rid of him and she goes down to the street, and spoiler alert for those who are going to hunt down this song from what, like 1950 or whatever. When she reaches the street, she finds that the little blue man has survived the fall, and he looks right at her and says, "I don't love you anymore." And that's the end of the song. Yeah, let's see. I am led to believe that this was, by the source of all knowledge, 1957.
Huh.
That's when she
did
it.
How about that? Yeah, my parents still have a pretty extensive LP collection of just all kinds of stuff, you know. Such enticing album covers as the best of Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass with the whipped cream lady on the front.
Yeah. I have to confess, I'm a big fan of Herb Alpert.
Yes,
I really am.
Yeah, I was a big fan of Herb Alpert's album cover. That's that was a thing.
Well, sure.
At a certain age, that's very interesting. That particular band.
I actually have a weird sort of. I am drawn to like the Big Bang music, the Big Bang music. You know, for the beginning of time. Yes.
I mean, there is a certain suggestion that it was very musical at that time. There just wasn't anybody to hear it.
It was very loud, I believe. Briefly, very loud.
Yes, briefly, very loud. That's great.
It's funny because I wasn't even going to get on the topic of music. But I have been watching this YouTube channel who I think I brought up before.
Yes.
Lord Voldemort or something.
Yeah, sure. Lord Voldemort.
He's a terrifyingly intense pianist because he insists on staring right into the camera and straight through the screen into your soul while he plays.
He's very much making a point of not looking at the keys as he plays these very complicated songs.
He did I found two videos. I just discovered these sailing off the coast of Portugal. No,
awesome.
I found two videos he did. One was the evolution of music from 1600 to 2017, and he starts with classical music, and he picks out pieces from each sort of era of music. Right up there, and he goes from, obviously things like the Moonlight Sonata and all the real classics, and he ends up at Sweet Dreams by the Eurythmics. Mm-hmm. And so this is fantastic. And then he did another one that he called the evolution of meme music from 1500 to 2018. And he started with Greensleeves, which is the original example of overplayed music whose melody was used for everything, and went up through a whole bunch of different really overplayed classical pieces, right up through, he did, what's Rick Astley's Rickroll song?
Never Gonna Give You Up.
And Nyan Cat. It was fantastic. I just feel it. I think I made the point on Twitter that I feel that We Like to Party by the Venga Boys, the Venga Bus song, that really should have been on there.
Great.
Anyway.
The thing to note, though, is it's actually two things to note from that meme video. Mm-hmm. One, he did have to look at the keyboard at one point for a little bit. And two, some of those pieces of music don't go well with a piano.
No, they very clearly don't. I did and then I watched another video of his, which was the 13 different types of piano players, or the some number of types of piano players.
Right.
And he's doing all these jokes about the sleeper, who's the guy who's leaning back in the piano, on the bench and just playing with his arms out. And he references himself in the middle of it because he has one called the Psychopath, where he is playing in his normal, intense way, staring directly into the camera with his eyes looking out of the screen, boring into your soul. So he self-identifies.
I do have to admit that I sort of miss in his more recent videos what he used to do in his older ones, which was the dead silent stare into the screen and past your soul and all that kind of stuff thing. And then at the very end, he would just shout the word subscribe.
Yeah. And I normally don't make fun of foreign accents, but whatever accent he has, when he was shouting subscribe, I have to assume that he wasn't playing this up much. But it sounded like his vocal cords just were not ever meant to produce the sounds of American English.
No, I don't know. I have some sense that he's Brazilian or something. Possibly one of those. I don't know, but he's fun to watch though.
He is. I really enjoy.
And I love his open face piano.
Which I didn't realize, but in the types of pianists video is revealed that it also has player piano functionality.
Yeah, I think it's worse than just player piano functionality. It's like MIDI player functionality.
Oh, that is worse. Though I do also still have a warm place in my heart for MIDI music.
Yeah.
But we did get off the point, though, because I want to ask how your father is doing.
Yes, the father man.
Yeah, I dragged you far afield, but
that's all right.
And obviously, I'm sure a lot of people out there are interested, especially after what you said.
Yes.
Last week, so
yes, thank you everybody who has expressed further sympathies and concerns and all that. We're doing fine, thank you. It's all good here. How are you? All right. I'm trying to remember where we got up to last time. Not what we said, because I could only have told you things up to Friday.
Right, and see, the problem is you and I keep talking. So I can't remember what you told everybody versus what I know.
So I have to think what has happened since last Friday to this Friday. And basically, things have gone really well. They did end up moving him out of ICU last Friday and putting him in his own, regular hospital patient room, whatever that is.
He's in the Gen Pop now.
Yeah. Yes, general population.
As those of us who are on the inside say.
There you go.
I killed a guy in a hospital once. That's why I've got this tattoo.
Oh, good.
Oh, wait, I might be getting hospital confused with something else again.
Sure.
Sorry.
Well, medical incarceration, whatever. Geez, now I've lost it. Okay.
So this is why no one comes to me for sympathy.
He's in his own room. Right. They have been doing various little tests on him and whatnot.
I remember the swallowing test was a big thing.
Yes, we passed the swallowing test finally.
So full esophageal function.
Yeah, that was a Monday thing.
Good.
So he was allowed to start eating from sort of the middle of the hospital menu. Mm-hmm. They have it arranged in different tiers based on your
skill level.
Yeah, your skill level. Yeah.
You can have the Jell-O or the ice cream. Steak is epic tier.
Yeah, that's it. Well, what it amounts to, is non-complicated food is in the middle somewhere. Super simple food is basically mush, right? Yeah, it's the stuff they give you intravenously and whatnot.
Yeah.
So the middle tier is kind of the bland, not too exciting stuff. Like he had his first real food was
vegetables that have been so boiled as to be liquid.
No. It was actually his breakfast, and it was just plain bland scrambled eggs, some chopped up ham, and plain oatmeal was like his first real meal. But anyway, he has since improved from there and is now allowed to select from the top of the menu. Ooh. So that's all back, and you could certainly tell the difference. we went from the scrambled eggs and ham thing to chicken pasta, sauce with lemon curd cake and
wow, that's lemon curd cake. That's
broccoli and cheese soup and all that stuff.
And for breakfast, I'll do the eggs Benedict with a side of poached salmon.
Exactly.
Can I see your fresh squeezed juice list, or do you have a mimosa?
It has been that sort of thing, yeah. But there was definitely a difference. Not all of these differences have been welcome, though. Apparently, he does not like barley soup in any way, shape, or form. I think it was barley and chicken or barley and something. Anyway, he didn't like that. That was no good. Yeah, that was like one taste, and nope, forget that. He has discovered. Oh, I have to tell you, the actual first thing he did once he was permitted to swallow like a normal person, was have a cup of coffee.
Right.
And this was hospital coffee. And it was brought to him from the hospital coffee reservoir. And the first words out of his mouth about the coffee were, "Oh man!" I mean, you could hear him out in the hall. Right. It was like, "That is so good." That is an opinion that has since been revised.
Well, that is the opinion of an addict getting his first fix after 2 weeks.
That's right.
Is what that is.
Yeah, that's exactly
an opinion
what
I know
is.
full well, by the way.
Yeah. We have since revised that opinion downward to the point where we now just all refer to it as brown water. And that's fine. That's all he can get for right now, so that's fine. No big deal. But he has been recovering remarkably well. In fact, we were pulled aside by his surgical doctor, because he now has 2 doctors. He has the doctor who was in charge of the surgery.
Right.
And all related things to that. And he has the doctor who is in charge of his more general care. med adjustments and monitoring, blood sugar and that kind of stuff, right?
Sure.
Yeah, that kind of thing. Non-surgical stuff. We were pulled aside by his surgical doctor, the one who did all the operating and patching up on him. And Mom and I were both told that this doctor has no idea how Dad's doing it, but he is recovering far better than anybody, including he, the doctor, suspected he would at this point. Mm-hmm. So he is ahead of the program. He's healing up well. The incision is patching itself up pretty well on its own. It's doing a good job there. Everything is going well, extremely well. The only difficulty we have at present is that he is extremely weak and extremely tired. Mm-hmm. Now, this is all expected to totally recover. It's just going to take time, somewhere on the order of a couple of months, maybe, to get back to what he was before.
Right.
But at this point in time, or at least as of yesterday at this point in time, standing up was limited to about 45 or 50 seconds that he could handle, before he absolutely positively would either fall over or have to sit down again.
Right.
And his mobility is limited to a couple of shuffly side steps, which is not at all where he was before all this. He was just fine as far as getting around and all that kind of stuff before all this. So as a result of that, and in order to get him back to that state, because they want to return him to a state that is at least as good as it was before he had his aneurysm. Mm-hmm. He has been assigned to go to a rehab facility on his discharge day from the hospital, which is either later today or tomorrow.
Oh.
So what that means is that he has received everything the hospital can do for him at this point. Right. There's nothing else they can provide him that he would not get on his own, either at home or in the rehab facility. Mm-hmm. Which is good. You don't want to spend any more time in the hospital than you have to, obviously.
Right.
For a variety of reasons, not just because it's no fun being in the hospital, but because if you stay too long in the hospital, lots of things can go wrong that weren't going to go wrong if you had gone home.
Yeah.
Just because of the nature of the place. Sick people are there. Did you know that?
Yeah. Well, also being in the hospital, you are not mobile.
No, you're not.
No matter how mobile they try to keep you.
Right.
So you are not recovering from that. That's, and on top of that, hospital, you are very prone to pneumonia in the hospital, which is the number one fear.
Yeah, he did get a touch of pneumonia, but they were so on top of it that they had him dosed up with antibiotics and everything before it even got a foothold.
Yeah, they don't let it mess around anymore.
No. So that was fine. He avoided that. Anyway, so the information that he was going to a rehabilitative care facility hit us a little out of the blue when somebody called up and asked us which facility he was going to want to go to.
Oh.
There was no, by the way, we're sending him to a rehab facility, or he needs to go to a rehab facility, or the intention after he's done with his care is to get him into a rehab facility so he can recover his full mobility and all that. It was just, which one do you want him to go into?
That's not the most fun way to find out about it.
No, that upset Mom a great deal.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Because at that point, it was like, what do you mean, a rehab facility? How long is he going to have to be there? And blah, 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 blah. And, because in her mind, it was immediately, he's going to be in rehab forever. This is it. He's going to the old folks' home. Because nobody bothered to specify anything about any of this. And so she was very upset.
Right.
And it took a great deal of work on my part to get her calmed down again and kind of get things into perspective. And so I spent the next day, starting at 7 a.m, up in Dad's hospital room, talking to everybody who came into the room to find out what was going on, who was doing what, and how he was doing where. Mm-hmm. So I met all the people involved in his care because they don't stop coming.
No, they
they're literally at least once every 45 minutes or so, somebody new was showing up to do something, you know?
Yeah, well, it will make you feel popular.
Yeah,
you know, you always have visitors there.
But we sat down and I sat down and I talked to Dad for a little bit about this whole rehab thing.
And how is it?
Well, he was worried about it too. Like it was literally, are they going to put me in there and I never get to go out again? What's going on? You know, because they didn't explain it to him very well.
Right.
So I got all that squared away, and it's literally he's going into a rehab care facility specifically to get him back on his feet and walking around under his own power, and then he can come home after that, immediately after that.
Right.
And they anticipate that it's going to be probably no more than 20 days. Mm-hmm. Possibly sooner, given Dad's rate of recovery at this point, you know.
Yeah, at this point, it wouldn't surprise me if he got out sooner.
The reason it's going to be no more than 20 days is because for 20 days, his insurance will totally cover his rehab stay.
Right.
Okay. After that, there's a copay.
Mm-hmm.
The insurance does not want to pay any more than they absolutely have to, as you can imagine.
Nope.
So they don't approve the entire 20 days. They approve it on a 5 or 6 day basis.
Right.
And at the end of those 5 or 6 days, the rehab facility has to produce a report that explains his current condition, the progress he's made, how much more progress they think he needs to make, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then based on that, the insurance company will add a few more days at a time.
Right. Believe it or not, I'm actually going through the same thing right now with my physical therapy.
Uh-huh.
They approved me for a certain period during which they'd cover it. And then I have to be reevaluated. And then the physical therapist actually has to justify giving me more physical therapy and then explain why the physical therapy hasn't been enough yet.
Right.
Which I think actually looking at that, it's a little rough on the therapist to basically say, well, why didn't you do your job better?
Right.
You know? But
exactly.
Sorry, but I digress.
No, that's fine. Because that's essentially what it is. They do have to justify why he's there and what benefit he is receiving. Mm-hmm. Which is fine. Okay. That means that he cannot go in there permanently.
Right.
At this stage. And he certainly, even if the insurance had approved all 21 or 20 days and then some and all that other stuff, we are still in control of whether he goes and how long he stays.
Yep.
And if we feel like he's been there too long and it's not, not getting any further benefit or whatever, or somebody's trying to take advantage of things or whatever, we say, okay, you're done. And he comes home.
Right.
And I have to tell you okay, so this is kind of a lengthy story to get to a point, but whatever. This community used to be a logging community. In other words, most of our money was made off of timber and the sale of timber and logging of timber and production of timber and wood goods and that kind of thing, right?
Right.
Well, that all got shut down a while ago, many, many whiles ago. Mm-hmm. And since then, it has become something closer to a retirement town. In other words, you come here to retire. And there are a number of retirement facilities. And 4 of those retirement facilities run the only 4 rehab facilities in town. Mm-hmm. Okay, physical rehab facilities. I'm not talking like drug rehab or anything like that. I'm just talking physical rehab stuff. All but one of those has a somewhat less than brilliant reputation. Okay.
Yeah.
So we were given the 4 choices and we didn't like 3 of them. So we said we would like him to go here. And the gal who was coordinating all this said, okay, but we do need a backup in case he can't get in there.
Right.
So we looked at the 3 unacceptables and tried to find the least unacceptable of them all for our second choice. So depending on where he goes, because it doesn't sound at the moment like he's going to get the first choice because they are full to the gills, probably because they do have a decent recipe. Yeah, exactly. So depending on which one he goes to, could determine a lot about what we do from here on out.
Right.
But as of this moment, to bring a long story to a close, as of this moment, he is recovering better than expected. The hospital has done everything for them that they can, you know, short of, you know, waiting until his incision fully heals and all that kind of stuff, which it's going to do anyway at this point.
Right. The hospital's role in the process is done.
It's done.
Yep.
Okay. And they are going to move him on to rehab this weekend, either today or tomorrow. And then based on that, they will assess how long he needs to be there. We think, because he has made some progress in terms of his mobility and whatnot, just over the course of the last 3 or 4 days. I think he said this morning he was able to stand up for like a whole minute and a half or whatever, which is way better than he was 2 days ago.
Yeah.
But we suspect maybe a week and a half in the rehab facility, and then he can come home.
Yeah, you know, in any other circumstance, I would say to me that sounds pretty like a pretty hopeful thing to say. But given everything else with him, it wouldn't surprise me in the least.
Yeah. He's just done incredibly well. And I also have to say I have received a number of stories from other folks who have had relatives of one sort or another go through pretty much the same thing, with varying degrees of success. And I appreciate your support and encouragement. Those of you who have been through it and kind of have been sort of cluing me in on how things are going to go and that kind of stuff. That's been helpful and very nice to hear. And if I have a lesson for any of you from this entire thing, it is this. When you get to be age 55 and you are a white male, which seems to be the predominant gender and age and race of those most often afflicted by this. Certainly if you are concerned and of any other category, then obviously go ahead and get it checked. But particularly if you are a white male, age 55 or older, and you have ever had any history of smoking in your past, or you have hypertension, or you are diabetic, go and ask your doctor to do the screening.
Or there is a history of heart disease in your family.
Yes, or a history of heart disease.
Even if you seem perfectly healthy, because there is a huge genetic component to this.
Right. Go and ask your doctor to do a screening for it. Okay? At least once a year. Once you turn 55, at least once a year is what they recommend. And it can either be a CAT scan, which is a little more involved than it really needs to be, I guess, but it's also capable of being caught on a sonogram. You know, like they do for when somebody's pregnant, they get the little thing out and they show you a picture of the baby and all that kind of stuff, you know, inside.
Right.
That's a sonogram basically. And they will do that and check for an aneurysm developing. And it's just a lot safer that way, because then they'll know about it ahead of time and the doctor will keep an eye on it and be able to advise you what to do about it in a controlled way rather than whoops all at once.
Right. And just because now we are in the wonderful position of giving out medical advice.
Yes, please just
listen to your doctor, because a small aneurysm that is developing is something that they monitor, but they do not necessarily treat.
Right.
Because it is not a death sentence. So when you go to your doctor, if they do find something and your doctor says, don't panic, this is not something that we worry about, don't panic and go hunting for a second doctor and think that, you know, they're going to let you die.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. A lot of people have small aneurysms somewhere in there. Like if you actually, like anyone over 55, if you took a CAT scan of their entire body, you'd find a small aneurysm somewhere. You'd probably find several.
Mm-hmm.
They happen, you know, but they are normally not a problem until they grow to a certain size and then until they actually let go. So don't also take this advice to throw you into a panic state.
Yeah.
You know?
Don't do that.
Just trust your doctor.
Yeah. Treat it as part of any other regular checkup. Okay, your doctor will note things that need attention. He will note things that won't need attention. Follow the doctor's advice and go from there. But do ask for the screening, just to be sure.
Okay.
There you go. I'm done. That's the dad update. Things are going okay. How's your week been?
Substantially better.
Oh, good.
Yeah. But honestly, you're not setting a very high bar right now.
No, it's easy. It's easy.
Though honestly, you know, this week has been a series of triumphs for your dad, really. So, you know, that's better than the alternative by far.
Yeah, we're all very happy about it.
Yeah. That's like, I'm not going to go into my own physical therapy thing. I've been having a rough week. I've been in a lot of pain and I had to miss a therapy appointment because I got a stomach virus and that set me back. And actually, I don't know if I mentioned it last week, but it was Allie's birthday, or the Tiny GM's birthday last week. And one of the things that I had promised her weeks ago was that we would go out to brunch and then we would go up to the Shed Aquarium here in Chicago. You know, we had been there once before over a year ago, and she really likes it. So I was very worried about how it was going to go because I was going to be on my feet all day.
Right.
You know, and you know, we were smart about it. You know, we spent like an hour, you know, walking. I don't remember what I've clarified, but I actually have two pinched nerves, one in my knee and one in my back. And treating either one aggravates the other. And my knee doesn't take a whole lot of weight right now. So if I'm on my feet for more than an hour, I end up in pain. But because of my back, if I'm sitting for more than an hour, I end up in pain. It's a fantastic game I get to play every day.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I was worried about it, but we actually planned it out smart. You know, we walked around for an hour and a half, and then we went to the little, you know, they have these movies. You know, you can watch the 4D experience.
Ooh.
Have you ever seen one of these 4D movies? They're like all the rage at theme parks. So it's a 3D movie. You go in and they put the glasses on you. But there's also like bubble blowers in the ceiling and vibrators in the chair and little air jets all over the place so that they can blow puffs of air at you. And we're watching a movie about the plight of it was supposedly called Coastal Predators. What it really was is the world hates sardines.
Oh.
Because it's like, you know, we picked it out of 3. There's 3 movies you could pick from. We picked Coastal Predators. That sounds pretty cool, right? So we go in there and they start talking about this sardine migration off the coast of Africa, southern Africa. And what happens is, you know, Antarctic waters sometimes ride up along the coast to create this river of cold water going north along the coast of Africa. And the sardines, they follow the cold water stream. And when they do that, they swim in these huge flocks or huge schools, right? Like gigantic, massive walls of fish, which they do for defense on the theory that, well, no one could eat us all. So they all group together to increase the odds that any one of them will survive. And it's the same theory you used to do in school where, you know, like, you know, well, they can't give us all detention. You know, right. That would be crazy. So then every freaking predator in the ocean chases the sardines and attacks them all at once. So there's dolphin cleaving through this thing, and the dolphin are driving them into sharks, and there's these birds. I can't remember what the birds are called, but they're dive bombing into the water like bullets. They're like torpedoes launched from planes. They go underwater, and then they swim around, and then they eat the sardines, and there's the shark I mentioned. There was other things. It's like there's 1,000 different predators that just chase these sardines and attack them. all at once. And the narrator is very careful to know, and the predators don't bother each other. Like, what is that, professional courtesy? They're showing like these birds dive, because the cinematography in this stuff is beautiful. You know, they catch all this stuff. So there's these birds shooting down into the water like bullets, shooting right next to these sharks and dolphins who are all swimming through. You know, the dolphins are breaking up the schools, trying to break up smaller schools, and the sharks are just, you know, swimming through it with their mouths open, swallowing everything. The birds are shooting down into it, and they're all just avoiding each other, except the poor sardines. I never felt so bad for stupid fish. At the end, you got to figure, like, so their theory, you know, I just pictured the sardines at the beginning. Okay, everybody stay together. Remember, if we stay together, they can't possibly eat us all unless every predator in the ocean decided to all attack us at once. But what are the odds that would happen? Jump cut to 10 minutes later.
I just have one question.
Sure.
How did the predators get the sardines out of the cans?
I knew that was coming with you. I should have known. Meanwhile, I wanted to mention the fort. I'm just going past that. The same way you do. They pull the little key.
Oh, okay. All right.
So the 4D movie thing, though, right? Mm-hmm. So while the movie is going on, there's like special effects happening in the theater because all these air jets and stuff. So for example, like they'll show dolphins breaching the surface of the water, and you know when a dolphin breaches the surface, it blows a little puff out of its blowhole and then takes an air. So every time it does that, they blow these jets of air at you. You know, and it's great because it is such an accurate simulation of trying to watch a nature documentary while someone keeps sneezing on you. It brings the whole experience to life. Poor Allie, she didn't know. She hasn't. I guess she hadn't done a 4D experience because they do them at theme parks all the time.
Right.
The first time the air jet blew, it blew up between our legs for some reason. They had an air jet just blowing straight up between your legs. I don't know what that was supposed to simulate, but I appreciated it. That was a nice little benefit of the ticket. She jumped like a mile out of her seat. She was like, oh my God. But yeah, so through the whole movie, they're just bubbles or drifting. Every time you go underwater, there's also like the seats have ground effects. So they have little lights on them so that every time you went underwater, there would be sort of this blue light coming up from just below your field of vision. And then it would turn to like a bright light when you're up in the ground, up above the water. So it simulates your eyes constantly trying to adjust to different light levels while you're just trying to watch a movie about some poor sardines. Mm-hmm. That was fantastic.
Good.
So then we walked around for another hour. Then we went to lunch. And then we walked around for another hour, and then we found another place to sit. So I was able to manage things that way, and it was a good day, but I still paid for it on Sunday. And then I got some sort of food poisoning, so I couldn't see the therapist on Monday, who I really needed to see, and I couldn't exercise on Monday.
Was it from eating sardines?
No, but I did get fish and chips at the aquarium. We're at the stupid food court in the aquarium, where it's like $70 for a hamburger because they've got you imprisoned there.
Right.
I'm looking at the menu at what I like, and I'm looking at like, this is going to sound terrible, but they've got fish and chips, and I really have a craving. And they have homemade tartar sauce on site, that they make their own tartar sauce.
Well, there's a hint. Right?
No aquarium should be referring to any seafood as made on the premises. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I would love to open an aquarium and have it like all the restaurants inside only serve seafood. Like there's a sushi bar and you could have a fresh lobster picked out, and that would be fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. All the little stands that sell snacks, they only sell like popcorn shrimp and cocktail shrimp and stuff.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So that was pretty much my week.
I may have mentioned previously that I'm working on some sort of game thing. I think I might have said once.
Yeah, I don't really listen.
Yeah, I know you don't.
It didn't sound interesting, so.
No, not at all.
It wasn't me.
However, if you would like it to sound interesting, I was on the Delve podcast talking about transit this last week. Delve being one of the shows that started on the Mad Adventures Society, for those of you who remember that, and has carried on after the closure of said society, all on its own, and they're doing really well. They talk to various game developers, tabletop game developers, about their games and the processes they go through and how they do the developing and that kind of stuff. It's very interesting. You can learn a lot, and the hosts are pretty okay. Which is high praise indeed.
The hosts are pretty okay.
Yeah. So I was on there for the first time. You'd have thought I'd have been on something before that was on my network or my page or whatever you want to call it. But no, this is my first time on there. And so we got to talk about transit and why it exists, what it intends to do, and how it intends to do it, and some of the more interesting points about the game. So if you would like to hear that, and I'm sure you would, I will put a link.
Listener.
Yes. I will put a link to that in the show notes, which you, Scott, can click on and follow straight on to the Delve podcast and the appropriate episode where I am brilliant and informative.
I sense we're no longer speaking hypothetically.
Maybe not. Anyway, yeah, there's stuff there, and I will link to it, and it can be listened to.
Excellent.
I was just reading an email that came into the show. That's all. I was just reading. We should read more emails that came into the show. Let's do feedback.
Okay.
All righty. Excellent.
Yeah, that sounds like a plan.
Oh dear. Okay. So you selected things to respond to this week, and
I know I got started with that habit 2 weeks ago when you asked me if I would look in and occasionally approve the comments that needed to be approved on Digressions and Dragons as you were indisposed.
Yes.
You know,
and I appreciate
selfishly
you
doing your own thing, whatever it was.
I know. Such trivialities.
And I actually discovered I kind of like going through the comments, and I even responded to a few. So then I got into the habit of actually picking out things that I wanted to talk about for an episode.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear it.
Also, it lets me get into the show topics before you so that I can establish the formatting.
Yeah.
Which we have a constant war over.
We do. Well, I don't know that we have a constant war over it. I think it's more like the whole Dropbox Microsoft Word has a war thing going on over it.
Yeah.
We're just
formatting
casualties.
in Microsoft Word is always a war.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
We're just casualties.
Yeah.
That's all. Commodore wrote in on episode 34 to suggest that we check out a series called Knowledge History D&D from the suspiciously similarly named Dungeons and Tangents podcast for a better take on Gary Gygax's life story.
Yeah, and I just thought it would be good to mention that in case anybody wants to check it out.
Okay.
Which I certainly will.
All right. So you're suggesting they all go listen to a different podcast. That's fine. I can deal with that. If you would like to know something more than what we have learned from our previous book learnings, then that is the place to go and check it out. I mean, we could do it now, but somebody else already has, so why should we expend the effort?
Well, what we could do is we could listen to theirs, and then we could do it better.
Oh, okay. All right. That's fine. We could try that. Ben Connolly emailed to Scott, and as it turns out, myself as well.
Yeah, I did
make a request. Yeah, to make a request. Would you like to describe and explain this request?
Yeah, I don't want to read the entire email.
Correct.
Because first of all, it was long, but second of all, it was also awash with his personal experiences.
Mm-hmm.
But he called attention to something specifically that I am guilty of. And that is something that is basically using the proper name God in various contexts, or using Jesus Christ's name as an expletive, and using the phrase "damn it" along with that word again. I know, and actually used to keep this stuff out of my language, because, you know, while I don't share this person's faith, I do have a deeper, abiding respect for, you know, everybody's faith and and I understand that it does make certain people of faith uncomfortable. And so in the past, I did avoid using those. In fact, very early on, in one of my Word of the Week blog entries that I think became a script, polytheism or pantheism.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if we did that episode.
I think so, maybe.
But I actually did write to GM saying, hey, and you should consider this because, you know, it offends people of certain faiths. Not offends, but makes them uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Ben was polite. He was respectful. And he made a very reasonable request. And I have nothing but respect for someone who approaches me with respect. And this is something that I should not have allowed myself to start doing. And frankly, I know I have a number of fans who have a very strong faith in one religion or another. I'm good friends with several of them, and our show also has, and so here's my pledge to Ben and to everybody else. I'm going to try and retrain my speech. I'm going to drop that stuff. I don't need it. It serves no purpose. And if it makes a certain portion of my, my fan base and the listeners of this show uncomfortable, I'm happy to drop it. The problem is, over the last several years, it has become very automatic. You just throw out, the name Jesus Christ as an expletive, because you're caught by surprise or something. And like anybody who's trying hard to change their habits, I'm going to screw up. So while I'm going to work at this as best I can, I also ask that anybody who is upset or uncomfortable by this, give me some leeway and accept that if I do screw up, it doesn't mean that I'm not trying. It just means that, it's like any habit. You're breaking a habit when you're trying to change your mode of speech. And that's all. And I wanted to address it on the air because because of the way Ben approached me. It was polite. It was with respect, and it was a simple request. And it's something that we can easily do to make someone a little bit more comfortable with or at least, like I said, like that I can do. Because as far as I know, Brian, this really doesn't involve you.
It's funny you say that.
Yeah.
Because I went back and listened to last week's episode.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Do you want to know who was the guilty party?
Okay.
It was me.
Really?
I was the guilty party in last week's episode. Now, I'm not saying I'm the guilty party in every episode, but last week was definitely me.
I know that the phrase "damn it," the full phrase, has entered my vocabulary, which is something that I always kept out of my vocabulary. Like, I would say "damn it," but appending God's name to it makes all the difference.
Right.
And I'm fully aware of that issue, and I understand it. And I let that slip into my vocabulary about 2 years ago. And I've been using it a lot on Twitter, so I figured this was at me. I didn't realize it was at you.
No,
But obviously I'm only speaking for myself here.
Sure. I had a pretty significant JC reaction to something that was said. It was rather strenuous and vociferous. But here's the thing. I too would like to apologize if I have offended anybody with that. I am sorry. That was not my intention. Largely, it was just within that context, it was a release of emotion that had maybe built up for a little bit. But that's not an excuse. That's the way it happened. Okay. So my pledge is actually a twofold pledge. I will do my best to not use that particular expletive or that series of expletives my own self. And when I am editing the show, any mistakes that do get made, I will make my best efforts to take them out, or at least bleep over them. So, since I can do that, I think we're safe in saying that 95% of all future occurrences that do occur will not occur because they won't be there to occur.
Yeah. And on my related stuff, I can only say I'm going to try because, of course, I don't have you editing my stuff.
Right. I am not editing the words that come out of your mouth. You're aware that a new God of War video game has come out?
No, it hasn't. And
you're aware, I'm sure I've seen you playing at least one of them before. I know that.
I am a fan of the God of War series.
Okay.
Well, I should say God of War 1, 2, and 3.
Uh-huh. I have a sense of that what is going to happen here is going to be a flat refusal, but Joe would like to send an email. Joe did, asking for your thoughts on the new God of War once you play.
Okay, so here's the thing. I'm not outright refusing. I will get around to it eventually. Mm-hmm. I am intrigued by it. I'm interested by the game. Mm-hmm. But I have trouble calling it, from what I've seen in trailers and, some gameplay videos and stuff. And I haven't watched too much because I always try to avoid anything remotely spoiler-like for anything that I might play. Even years on down the road.
Right.
But from what I've seen, the game looks good and it looks like a lot of fun, but it does not look like it has any of the elements that made God of War other than big boss fights and occasionally crushing skulls. And there's so much more to the God of War series than that. Number one, they gave Kratos a kid. He's raising a kid. And watching some of the trailers and some of the gameplay footage, it reminded me less of God of War and more like the beginning of Horizon Zero Dawn, where your father is raising you and teaching you, except that your father is a little less patient with you and you're playing the father. And the father's not afraid to call you a dog. I actually tried to stop shy of the expletive.
Good job.
And corrected it to the expletive. Oh, no, I can't say that. What do we go with? Oh, that one. Okay.
Dummy head.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm interested, but I have trouble calling it a God of War game. And maybe when I play it, I'll say, oh, no, they captured the essence of it.
Okay. Well, Joe was just asking.
Yeah, I know. But I can't just take a request like that without a speech.
I know.
I am cautiously optimistic, though, about it. It does look like fun. It just doesn't look like fun for the same reason God of War is fun.
Well, here's one for you. This won't take any time at all to answer, I'm sure. Liam wrote in, and he just wants to know, how do you keep D&D fresh? If you're WotC, you reboot it every 5 or 6 years.
It's the same way you keep Star Wars fresh, and the same way you keep every video game franchise ever fresh. Just start from scratch. Well, though even that doesn't jive, because WotC, except for 4th edition, has always purposely tried to distill D&D back down to its essence and start from that. So that's not really keeping it fresh,
It's reviving the corpse.
Right.
Okay.
Anyway. It's a tough question.
Oh, I don't know if it's that tough.
All right. Then you take it. What do you got?
I mean, it depends on your play style.
Right.
Or your GMing style.
Well, I could have copped out, too.
Yeah.
Well, it depends. Next.
But if you are the kind of GM who wings it, It's pretty easy to keep it fresh. You just keep the plot moving and you do something weird and different. Within the realm of whatever story you think you're trying to help everybody tell. But if you are the kind of GM who relies on pre-printed modules and that sort of thing, you're kind of asking everybody else to keep it fresh for you. And that is definitely not a thing WotC has done in this edition. Mm-mm. But then again, maybe you're the kind of GM who plans things, and Scott will tell you how to keep it fresh for that guy, because I don't know.
Well, my problem is, like, D&D is a broad umbrella. As you've said, it encompasses many different play styles. And even within the game itself, there are many different possibilities for settings and stories and whatever. And so the question is, first of all, like, the first question I would ask Liam is, are you asking hypothetically, or has it gotten stale for you? Because if you're asking hypothetically, because you're looking down the road and saying, well, when this gets boring, what am I going to do? That's kind of a defeatist attitude, you know? It doesn't necessarily have to get dull. But if you're asking because you specifically have experienced some staleness in the game, then the next thing is to identify what it is that is actually why the game feels stale. You know? I mean, is it just there's not enough variety in the classes? Do you feel like you've done every monster, every plot, or whatever? You know, and you know, because you can change up the setting. You know, if you're used to doing a standard high fantasy epic setting, you can drop it down to like swords and sorcery and do a low magic setting and take out all the magic using classes so everybody has to play, well, just 2 classes really. But you could do that, you know, or you can start doing gimmicky settings, like do elves only. Write a whole setting about elven heroes setting out from an elven homeland to do elven things and have elven adventures in, like, you know, that sort of a thing. Or, you know, change up the types of campaigns you run. You know, a lot of GMs just get into ruts where they keep doing the same things over and over again. Where it's, you know, like, I always run these mystery campaigns, or I always run, like, Adventure of the Week campaigns. In which case, just try running something different. And honestly, if none of that really works for you, then the best thing to do might be to walk away from D&D and take 6 months and play any one of the infinity of other role-playing games that are out there. Like, maybe it's just a fantasy thing that's wearing on you. Maybe you're tired of elves and dwarves. So grab something that isn't elves and dwarves and fantasy. You know, play Shadow of the Demon Lord. You know, go for Victorian steam horror. You know, or play Star Wars. You know, play a superheroes campaign. Play Mutants and Masterminds. That's fun. I'm actually now just literally looking at my bookshelf, just saying, here, play this instead. But take some time away. You know? And you'll find that, you know, a little, as they say, absence makes the heart grow fonder. Or you might discover something that you love enough, and your players might discover something you love enough that you spend the next 5 years playing that, and by the time you're done with it and bored with it, you can try out 6th edition of D&D. You know?
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, you have to figure out why it feels stale in the first place. You know, D&D is a very, very broad brush. I mean, what year is it now? 2018.
Yes, all year long.
Yeah, so 20, 30 years. So I've actually been running D&D for 30 years pretty steadily. The longest hiatus I've had was about 9 months, and there was only one of those, and it was horrible. And I have played other games too. You know, people accuse me of only playing D&D. I play a lot of other games, but D&D is the one I keep coming back to for running campaigns. So I've been running campaigns fairly steadily in D&D since I was 10 years old. And I still wouldn't call it stale. I always find something new to do. But that might just be me. It just might be my niche.
Yeah, it could be. Just poke at it until it gets interesting, or take time off until you're interested in it again.
I hesitate to say this because, obviously, with a question like this, I can't give advice to like a one-line question because I guess I'm Socratic, and that I want to keep just yelling questions at someone until they have answered their own problem themselves. Which that's how Socrates did it, right? He would yell at people and beat them up until they fixed their own problem.
More or less.
Yeah. So anyway, it's hard for me to give advice like this because I want to ask all these follow-up questions and say, what specifically is causing the problem? And then fix that. And if that doesn't work, then go for the next thing on the list that seems to be specifically causing the problem. But there might be just an element of general, assuming Liam is a GM, there might just be an element of GM burnout in here.
Mm-hmm.
Every so often you have to take a break from running games to just refill your creative juices.
All right. Do you have you answered thoroughly? Do you feel?
I think so. I have pontificated thoroughly.
All right. Excellent. Mr. Scott, sir.
Yes.
I have a question. This is a holdover question from last week's discussion, if you'll remember.
I do remember.
Why? Yes. Often surprised myself. Why don't players trust their GMs? What have we done to deserve such distrust, sir?
Well, of course, some GMs have earned that distrust.
Well, sure.
I mean, we have to admit that.
Yeah.
But
it's not as if everybody has a wolf boot story.
Right. Well, but this is the thing. Depending on when you started gaming, if you started gaming at a particularly young age, or right up through your mid-teens, then you probably do have a wolf boot story.
Okay.
Because, we were at that age, we were all antisocial teenagers who, we were jerks, So, yeah, your GM at that age was probably abusive and you were probably a terrible player, So, but I don't think it's just bad experiences with GMs. I mean, well, first of all, okay. Let's qualify this first.
Uh-oh. Okay.
Okay. Because if I recall correctly, you sort of brought this up more than I did.
Yes.
What is it that makes you think that a propensity of players do not trust their GMs?
Because I internet and I hear the stories all the time.
Mm-hmm.
All the time about how terrible things have been perpetrated upon the poor innocent players by their evil, untrustworthy GMs.
Right. All of which make for really entertaining stories.
Sure.
Right. Which is exactly why people share them.
That's why I get to sit there and shake my head about how terrible GMs are, even though I'm a GM myself and know better, and how terrible players are, even though I also play and know better, and how between the two of them, there's no game that's ever run as correctly as mine is.
Right. Well, I mean, but that kind of gets to the question right there, though, is how much of this is just the effect of the news never reports on the billions of people who didn't get murdered every day.
Right.
And even the people who have had bad experiences with GMs, how many of them do you think really don't trust their GM? Or is it just they told a funny story and then that, or
I know that there is at least a percentage that genuinely don't trust their GMs, because apparently there was some deep trauma. I know that there are some that genuinely don't.
Right.
But whether that's like a large percentage of some or a small percentage of some, I do not have an answer for you on that. But I assume, since I'm asking the question, that there must be nearly 100% that do.
Right. Well, I'm not accusing you of anything here, I'm just saying. The reason I want to start with that question is because in past editions, and even I think in the current edition to some extent, if you listen to what the designers, what the D&D designers have said as they've been redesigning editions, they, to a greater or lesser extent, they do make efforts to insulate the game against bad GMs. Right? They add features to the game that are supposed to protect players from the abuses of GMs. And for whatever reason, I'm really hard pressed to think of an example right now, which bothers me. Because I'm usually pretty good at coming up with examples.
Well, let me roll back to a really old example.
Okay,
I'm going to show you... let's see. I could do Tamawakan.
Okay.
I could do, what's that other thing? The thing they just redid. The,
Giants against the Giants?
No.
Tomb of Horrors?
Yeah, Tomb of Horrors. There you go.
Okay. But
boy, how do you forget that one?
Don't use Tomb of Horrors. Tomb of Horrors is garbage.
No. I have to use Tomb of Horrors.
Okay.
To illustrate the old way of doing things.
Mm-hmm.
And the old way of doing things was where Gary Gygax specifically told you as the GM to cheat and cheat badly.
Right.
Seems like a problem. But there it is. It's in there. It's written right in. And then they released it as written right in there.
Yeah, and but I know this is painful to admit, but that's 40 years ago. It's a long time now.
No, I know.
I don't think that could be blamed for the current crop of young players who don't trust their GMs.
No, it totally can be. It must be. Well, it has to be. Where else did this come from? Where did these new people start screwing up with these new enlightened thinkers of DMing and GMing? How could they possibly have engendered stories of terrible GMs?
Well,
am I being too facetious?
I don't. Well, okay. So I think first thing, can we admit that the role of a GM is kind of weird to begin with?
I think we can.
Okay. Because on the one hand, the GM is, on the one hand, sort of a reactive game designer. Okay? Because when you sit down to run a game, you have sort of the same goals that the designer of any video game has. You're trying to create an engaging and challenging game experience for a group of players. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, ideally, that's your goal.
That is, I think, what the expectation is, yes.
Right. Which is not the same, that's a design goal. That has a certain level of maturity to it. Right? And it has a certain level of selflessness to it, to be honest.
Right.
It's like your job is to create something for other people to enjoy. And you are supposed to get satisfied from the act of creation. And I'm not saying that's not possible. It's just, that's the theory. But on the other side, unlike any other game designer, you're also sitting there constantly tweaking the design to make it, to react to whatever the players do, and to also recognize when something has gone wrong and fix it. Right?
Mm-hmm.
But the sheer act of tweaking the design to fix it is in itself a part of the game that can change the way the players engage with the game. Right? So if you're for example, imagine you realize that a monster is going to go down too fast to be the climactic fight that it's supposed to be, and you feel that will lead to a less than dramatic conclusion of you've been building up this boss monster for months, and now the fight, and it's going to go down in one round. Right? As a game designer, you look at that and say, okay, that is a bad game experience. I'm going to bump up his hit points. But if you got caught doing that by your players, right? Like if the player was watching and saw you cross out the hit points and write in the new total, hypothetically, the player's experience would be ruined by that because they would see it as you trying to rob them of your victory. They're going to assume a motive on there. It's like, well, we almost won that, you know, and now you're trying to make it last this many more rounds, and now we might lose, you know? So the mere act of tweaking the design is a part of the game itself and has to be taken into consideration when you determine what to do. On top of all of that, you also present the players with all of the antagonists in the game. And if you're doing it right, like if you're playing a villain in the game, and the players do something really clever to foil your plans, then the proper way to play that villain is, assuming the villain escapes and comes up with a new plan, is to find a way to work around the players. Right? I mean, that's an appropriate way to run a campaign, with the villain kind of setting the plot. So, but in that respect, you are playing against the players because you have to think like the antagonist. And that's a weird role to be in as well. So already, like what I'm saying is the act of GMing involves a lot of different hats, and those hats put you in really unexplored territory compared to what you might have gotten playing board games or playing video games or reading books. It's a really different space for a GM to be in. And all of those things are pushing and pulling against each other. It's like, do I focus on fairness, or do I focus on creating the best game experience possible? And if I'm constantly manipulating all the rules, have I actually taken the player's agency away too much? Like every time you keep a monster alive for an extra round, you are essentially robbing the players of the consequences of their choices. Because you're saying, nope, you didn't really kill him, he lives for another round. But you might be doing that for the excitement of the game. Or you might say, well, that was close enough to kill it, I'm just going to kill off this monster now. Same thing, you're robbing them of agency. You know, you are taking away the consequences of their choices. You know? But that might create a better experience. But if you got caught doing it, then the players would feel like it was unfair. Because they would now know that you are manipulating the outcome and that they are not in control, because they need to have the illusion of control. So it's already a delicate balance to walk, and everything you do toward one thing, like an exciting game or fairness or, you know, whatever else you might be prioritizing, is going to affect something else. So to some extent, I would actually say that being a GM lends itself to being mistrusted. To some extent, because you're balancing all of these decisions, and some of the decisions you make could be perceived as against the players. And then sometimes you're actually actively playing against the players. You know? And I don't mean in an antagonistic way, like the monsters are trying to win. But, I mean, if you're actually running the game properly, your monsters should appear to be trying to win. You know, the goblins shouldn't just roll over and die. They should fight their damnedest. You know?
If they're not, then there's something wrong somewhere else.
Right. And if the monsters are just pushovers and they roll over and die, and then the players eventually get a sense of it, and now you've ruined their sense of victory because they feel like you'll let them win no matter what.
And then try to correct and see what happens.
And Which now, so, and the thing is, nothing in the game, nothing in the player's handbook, nothing in the DM's guide explains GMing like this. If there is a quote out there from any rule book published in the last 10 years, send it to me. I would love to know it. Okay? And don't send me the facilitate shared storytelling BS, because that is not the GM's job. Okay, that's a lie. But no, so the players don't really understand the role of the GM. And the GM, until they really get good at it, only has a hazy notion of the role of the GM. especially all of the push and pull between all of the different motivations. So it's sort of inevitable that a certain level of mistrust is going to happen because the players actually don't know the game that the GM is trying to play. You know, the GM's motives are not on the table, and to some extent, if the GM puts his motives on the table, it will affect the game.
So
does any of that make sense?
So essentially what you're saying is something we've said before, which is that the players and the GM are playing two different games at the same time.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think that's in dispute.
And that because the players don't know the game the GM is playing very well, and because the GM is sort of pushing his game into the player's game, that overlap, that weird overlap and underlap are causing distrust because nobody knows what anybody else is doing.
Right. And it is necessary to some extent for that asynchrony of information to exist because it improves the game experience.
Right.
The other thing on top of that is when you get down to it, the GM actually has the power over the life and death of your character. The GM has absolute power over the game. No matter what the books say and, you know, all that other stuff, the GM can change any of the rules, can break any of the rules, and if you don't like it, the GM can say, well, then you go find another game. Okay? As soon as there is one person who has absolute power over a group of other people, the moment something goes against one of those other people, there is going to be a little voice in the back of the other person's head that wonders if it wasn't the person who had the absolute power doing it on purpose. You know, it's sort of the corollary of power corrupts. Because we all know power corrupts, when someone has power and we can't see what we're doing and then we lose, we sort of wonder if there isn't something to blame them for. You know?
We make the assumption that power has, in fact, already corrupted.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you know, imagine if I had like a paperless lottery, right? So you pay me $1, and then I will give you a number, and then I'll tell you whether that number wins or loses, right? So you pay me $1, and I say, you got number 7. Oh, you lost. And then I keep your $1. Do you really trust that I'm running a fair game there?
No, it seems odd.
Right. Even if I am running a totally fair game where I go, you know, where I already knew the number for the day and I had a list of random numbers and that's how I gave you your number, even if it's totally fair, because you can't see what I'm doing and you're out $1, you're going to wonder. You know?
Okay, so we have the disparity of the games being played as one factor. What else have we got? Did my Wolf Boots experience with my player cause him to distrust GMs from then on?
It could have. I mean, let's be honest. You know, the problem is everybody is different. Maybe he laughed it off and moved on, or maybe from that point forward, you know, he was like, GMs are just out to screw you. And then what happens once you convince yourself of that? Well, either. I mean, you and I can both name a few people who we know have had just absolutely terrible luck with GMs. Who have had nothing but a string of poor experiences.
Right.
But we also know that a certain number of people who claim to have had bad experiences with GMs are also suffering from some degree of confirmation bias, where they're just waiting. You know, they can have 2 years of a good game under a GM, and then one thing goes wrong, you know, like their character dies, and they say, see, I knew the GM was out to get me. He was just playing the long game. Right? So maybe your Wolf Boots person went on to never have another negative experience with a GM, except for those that he was waiting for, and through confirmation bias has convinced himself that all GMs are untrustworthy. Either way, it's safe to say that you completely ruined that player for every future GM.
Which is probably why he went on a couple of months later to become his own GM.
Right.
So what else? What else have we got? Is it mostly just storytelling?
I think that's a lot of it. My gut, because I have no data on this, and we obviously have no data on this, but my gut tells me that a lot of the distrust of GMs that we see and the designers talk about and all of that stuff, it's overblown. You know?
Mm-hmm.
It's just something, it's funny war stories that get shared and then blown out of all proportion. Can I give you the mathematical inverse of this problem? That's something that I've been noticing a lot of lately.
Okay.
When I put forward an idea for a new rule or a system or a way of designing a game or whatever, there is invariably a GM who will point out the ways in which the players will break it. Who will say, hey, what if the players do this? Like, I was having a conversation with someone about outdoor dungeons. Like, how can you run a forest exploration as a dungeon? And it's fairly easy. You just use the forest paths, the paths through the forest and clearings and trails and stuff, and the same way that you would use rooms and hallways, and you just move them between the sites. That's one way to do it. And the response to that was, well, what about, you can only do that at low levels, because at high levels, what keeps the players from just flying over the forest from encounter to encounter?
The social contract.
It's not even that. It's just they usually just don't.
Yeah.
Like, I've done the forest thing, and they don't just, well, clearly we're being railroaded through a dungeon here. Let's just take wing and fly over it.
Let me get my chainsaw out.
Yeah. Where's the warp zone here?
Yeah.
Well, that's the other thing. Is then someone else chimes in with, well, what if they just start hacking through the underbrush? It's like, then they go to a different room than the one you wanted them to go to. And you'll keep running the game. But in my experience, if you give players two paths to choose from, it is the very, very, very rare player who will actually start burrowing through the wall to make their third path.
Mm-hmm.
But the number of GMs who worry about players taking picks and mattocks to the walls and trying to dig their own hallways through the dungeon is astronomical. And I think it's the same problem. There's just this mistrust of the motives of the players who, if give the players any chance to break the game, and they will. Well, in my experience, that yes, there are players who will try to break the game. Okay, they do exist. I'm not saying there aren't players like that. Okay. Those are the people who go on to become quality assurance testers, or auditors. They're soulless, basically. But they're not the majority. But the fear of them drives so much unnecessary worry. And I think that's the same thing that you see in players, is the fear of the unfair GM drives so much unnecessary worry. I mean, every time you talk about banning races and classes from your campaign, which I talk about a lot because it seems to be an unforgivable curse. It's the fourth unforgivable curse after Crucio and Avada Kedavra. It's banning someone from playing their favorite race and class. And that also comes down to the same, the GM's just doing that to screw me out of my favorite thing. It's like, really? You think I wrote this whole campaign book because I wanted you not to have the one choice you enjoyed. That's why I did this. You, sir, have greatly elevated your importance in my mind. Or your perceived importance in my mind. I love the idea that I spend all my time figuring out, how am I going to screw John today? But I think that's it. It's all fear of the same thing. It's fear of the fear of the GM's motives.
Okay.
Well, here's the question, though. Because let's say the problem does exist. Okay. Players inherently mistrust GMs. GMs inherently mistrust players. What's the balm against it? What do?
You communicate better, for one thing.
Mm-hmm.
You then have to build up experience with a certain group of players and a certain GM so that they learn to trust that GM and those players better, which means being open about what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Right.
Which means maybe you roll dice in front of them as a GM just to prove that this is the way things are going.
Right.
Then, of course, you discuss every element of your game with them and the campaign and how the plot goes. And you never really do anything they don't expect you to do.
And, well, when you do, like, no, I keep going. Sorry.
Okay. You don't do anything they don't expect you to do. If you make a change, you explain the change thoroughly. What am I missing? Everything?
I don't know. No, I mean, that's a really good list. But then you run into the not doing anything the players don't expect you to do.
Mm-hmm.
Are you giving up something there?
Yeah, you don't get to surprise them with anything.
Right. Now, is that good?
Oh, no, that's terrible.
Right.
Because you always want to catch them a little off guard.
Okay.
At least. But if it's an issue of building trust, you can't do that right away until they trust you.
Right. See, that's the key, I think. I think that's the key. Is not, you can never surprise them. It's that if you don't have the trust of your players, you have to build the trust gradually.
Mm-hmm.
And then you earn the right to surprise them. You earn the right to hide some of the die rolls behind the screen by rolling all of your dice right out in the open. Until that first day where you go, guys, I'm going to roll this perception check behind the screen because I don't want you to know whether there's anything to see or not. And then because you've rolled all your dice in front of the screen and out in front of them and established yourself to be fair, they looked at it and said, no, that seems fair. This guy plays straight. And then you roll the dice behind the screen. And then the next time you have to do that, you don't have to explain it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. But I think there's also one other important thing that is probably the hardest thing to do.
What would that be?
Well, the first step to fixing any problem is to clean your own room.
Mm-hmm.
And in that case, it means you also have to assume the best intentions of everyone. If you want other people's trust, you have to trust other people implicitly first. Right?
Absolutely.
So, if your players do break something in your game, you cannot immediately, you have to convince yourself that the players didn't do that on purpose. That it was a genuine accident. They were just playing the game and they didn't realize they were breaking anything and they didn't intend to break it. And they haven't lost your trust,
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing you have, here's the thing. If you want your players to trust you as a GM, you have to trust your players absolutely. I can't count the number of players or the number of GMs who are terrified to let players roll their own ability scores at home. Right? Or roll their own hit points at home.
True.
We do it at the table just to keep everyone fair. I mentioned to someone that I used to run online games just using a Skype connection. We would just have a voice call on Skype and the game was totally narrative. And someone's like, well, how did you handle dice? I said, everybody had a set of dice in front of them. They'd roll it and then tell me what they rolled. I said, well, how did you know they weren't cheating? I said, because I assumed they weren't. And you know what? Honestly, there's no cash prize for the game.
Yeah.
So even if they were cheating, if it was that important for them to win, I'm not going to take that from them over a game about pretend elves, But yeah, it's just, I assume that they're not. I assume that most players aren't going to break the game. Because you can fall down a rabbit hole of proofing your game against the, player or GM who is going to break it. You see the player who's afraid to write any family members into their backstory because they know the GM is going to kill them all off.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to some extent, though, that's the role of the GM is to threaten everything that your character cares about. That's what lets you be a hero.
I agree with you.
Yeah. And I think otherwise that's a very good list of how you build trust.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, you shouldn't even start there. Like, I think that, when you sit down with a new group for the first time, yeah, don't go all out, but assume you have the player's trust until you seem not to. And then if you don't, then you start doing all the stuff like, oh, okay, I'll build their trust. I don't know. Is it just me, or when you were a kid, weren't you taught that you trust someone until they give you a reason not to?
Yes, but that doesn't work anymore, sir.
Why not?
Because you end up with gullible children who will wander off with strangers.
That doesn't happen nearly as often as people say it does.
It's on the news all the time.
That's because they don't tell you about all the millions of children that didn't get kidnapped, and most children are kidnapped by people they know.
Oh. You see the problem.
I do see. Well, yeah, but the problem is, again, motivated by fear.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's not the fact that the world is full of evil. And I'm not, please, nobody take me as denying the existence of evil in the world. I know evil exists. But at the same time, it's the fear that evil is everywhere, that really causes the problem. Anyway, but meanwhile, GMing.
Yes, meanwhile in GMing,
the fear that every GM is going to be is out to screw you.
Mm-hmm.
You're at that point, you're never going to have fun at the game. Because even if the GM never sets out to screw you, you spend so much time waiting for the GM to screw you that you're not having fun, or protecting yourself, or getting ready, or being prepared. It's very fatiguing to wait to be stabbed in the back. It wears you out.
It does. Mm-hmm. It does. And on that note, sir.
Yeah.
We are really, truly, genuinely out of time.